Hello and welcome to another episode of Discover with Spinati. I'm your host, Dr. Spinati. We are talking about no implant, big problem. We're talking about the situation of you losing a tooth. And if you go to the dentist and your dentist says, sorry, ma'am, sorry, mister, that tooth needs to come out because we cannot save it. So you started off with this, or maybe like half of this, and now it's been extracted. And the extraction is that easy. So it's taken out like this. It's not that easy. But now you have a missing tooth. So you're like, okay, so what? Like, what's the big deal? Who cares? And this is the point of today's topic, which is what happens when you just leave your tooth, when you leave the missing component there, because a lot of people think it's not a big deal. Well, I'm about to show you it's actually quite a big deal. If you go to Google and you type missing tooth consequences, so I'm going to shrink my face. So you can see it here, missing tooth consequences. And you can see a slew of different images as to what happens when you miss a tooth. So when you're missing a tooth, I'm just going to illustrate it very quickly here. When you miss a tooth, what happens is, a lot of things happen. But one of the first things that happen is that you start losing bone. But you start losing bone not just this way, not just lengthwise, but you start losing it this way, widthwise. Okay, so if you can see on the screen, you'll see, for instance, that one. I'm going to point to it for a second. Right here, this guy, you can see it's a small ridge, and this is the ridge. The ridge is the area where the tooth was. Okay, so the ridge has become a lot smaller. Furthermore, what happens is that you can see also here is that teeth start to shift inward. Okay, because teeth want to fill in that space. So, and because you start losing bone, so you don't have any more support to hold these teeth up, and you start losing gum tissue. So now these teeth here, this one starts to shift that way. This one starts to shift that way. And they don't shift like soldiers, right? They don't shift straight up. They tilt. Okay, so now you have bone that is resorbed, or you start losing bone, and then you have root that's exposed. With root exposure, you have increased sensitivity initially, and then because obviously you're brushing daily and you're exposing your mouth to sugars and carbs and acids and so on and so forth, then you start getting something called root decay, because root decay happens at a much higher frequency than, or much higher, you're a lot more prone to get root decay once the root is exposed than for you to get cavities from the enamel. So now you have root exposed, you have root decay, and then you have sensitivity. And then you have something that I always talk about, which is abfraction lesions. Okay, abfraction lesions look something similar. Let's see if we can find it here. Looks something similar to this right here. Okay, this part right there. Okay, this is the start of an abfraction. Okay, where you have a kind of like a ditching of inside the root. So you can see here what happens. This is actually a really good illustration of what happens when someone misses a tooth. So you can see here that person missed the tooth. They didn't do anything about it, and they kind of just kept it there. So what you can't see is the ridge from this side to this side has now collapsed. But what you can see is this tooth here has supererupted. This tooth here has completely tilted this way. So now whatever is going to be trapped underneath here, you can't really clean it very well. So now you're going to have tooth decay here. You're going to have decay here because now you have a bigger space here in between the two teeth because of the tilting. The bone morphology, even the bone it's no longer straight. Okay, and I see this so often. So now your entire bite on this side has changed because, as you can see here, this tooth has gone up, right? Like you can see if you draw a line, straight line, you can see this tooth here has gone upward. This has gone downward. So now your entire jaw structure, literally, your entire bone has changed in its form. Like the way that your bone has been formed is completely different. It's off. So you can see here too, is this what happens as well, is that you start getting these spaces between your teeth. And obviously with spaces between your teeth, now every time that you bite, now you have what we call the occlusal force, or the biting force is no longer distributed properly. So now you have a lot of pressure on these teeth, whereas before with all the teeth you used to have an equal distribution of the bite force. So what does that mean? That means now your teeth are more prone to getting cracks and fractures and so on and so forth. And you're also getting more pressure on the bone, which means now you have more further bone loss and further gum loss and further problems with regards to root exposure, abfraction lesions. So you start getting something like this. Okay, you start getting these kind of things. And you can see it here. I mean, you can see it through all these illustrations, right? It's illustrated on many different levels here. And you can see it here. So bone resorption, you get tilting of the adjacent teeth, you have over eruption of opposing teeth. And now you can't put anything in here anymore, right? Like at this point, you're like, okay, well, I can't chew on this side, which now leads me to my next point. But let me finish this point first. You can't chew on this side. So you're like, okay, well, now I'm going to chew only on the other side or mainly on the other side, which now poses a different kinds of problems because when you're chewing on the other side, now the other side is getting the majority of the force, the majority of the the carbs and the acid attack, and so you have an much increased chance of getting cavities, and you actually will get a lot more cavities on the other side because that's where you're chewing more. You start getting more fractures, larger fillings, which means that your tooth is now becoming weaker. So that's all from missing one tooth. And then, as you can see here, I mean, they didn't actually kind of illustrate it, but as you can see, once you like lose one tooth, then it becomes a lot easier for you to lose more teeth, right? Because the bone loss, because all the other factors that I just mentioned to you. Okay, so this is what happens when you lose a tooth, and it's very the thing is that I want to kind of illustrate to you is that the perception of you missing a tooth and leaving it kind of empty and you thinking is not a big deal because you're thinking to yourself that it's very expensive for you to put an implant in. Well, the argument here that I'm making for you is that it's actually a lot more expensive for you not to put an implant in. Because if you don't put an implant in, now you have a slew of problems that is incredibly expensive to reverse, if at all, right? If you catch it early, you can reverse it, but obviously now the cost is much, much more, and the treatments are much more extensive, and now you've lost bone, you've lost tissue, like you can't regain those things. So now you're working with things so that things don't get worse anymore. So my advice to you is that if you have a tooth that you're missing, okay, if you have a missing tooth, go to your dentist right away. Okay. And if you don't have a dentist, you can call us. We're more than happy to help you out. But in any case, what you should do is you should see your options with regards to getting your oral health balanced again. Because once you start losing teeth, then it's a domino effect. And once that domino effect starts, it becomes more and more expensive and more difficult for you to regain the oral health. And as we all know, oral health is tied to your body health and it's tied to your mental health. So it's quite important for you to pay attention to this. I hope you benefited from this. If you have any questions, feel free to feed them to us. And as always, keep smiling.